Hello everyone, welcome to Chapter 1 in Call Principles and Practices by Egbert and Shahrokni 2018. This chapter looks at how technology can be leveraged to support language learning. Generally, to use technology effectively in the learning process, educators are advised to use it in line with the learning goals and objectives. In other words, technology is a tool used to support educational goals. When it comes to language learning, the same rule applies. We need to know how languages are learned and use technology to support that process. Fortunately, years of research in language learning have shown us some pointers. Let's look at some salient principles of language learning. Language learning requires comprehensible input. Input is the linguistic signals that learners receive through their senses, for instance, through listening to someone talking in the target language, reading a short story in the target language, or watching a movie or someone signing. In order for input to be useful for language learning, however, it should be comprehensible. That is, learners should understand the essence of what is received. This level of comprehensibility is usually described as being slightly above the learner's current language level. Furthermore, language learning needs comprehensible output. Output is the linguistic signals that learners produce in writing, speaking, and signs. Learners expressing themselves through different means of expression can help them practice the language and possibly notice and be aware of the gaps in their learning. Language learners should notice the gaps in their language skills. These gaps could be noticed in many ways, including readings, teachers' feedback, and interactions with native or non-native speakers of the target language. Language learners should use what they have learned actively and creatively with other people. This gives them a chance to practice the language in a meaningful way, which in turn allows them to notice the gaps in their language abilities. Language learners need a lot of tailor-made supports, such as simplified language, hands-on learning, modeling, visuals, and graphics from their teachers and capable others. Alright, now you know some of the key language learning principles. Language educators try to provide language learning opportunities to students where these principles are supported, and of course technology is another tool in their toolkit to do so. But unfortunately, there is no guarantee that the students can use the opportunities offered. There are so many external variables that come into play. For example, a student may be hungry, sick, or just not in a good mood that day. I think we all have our own experiences of not being engaged in class. Fortunately, however, educators can apply the principles of task engagement, which is about creating engaging classroom tasks or activities, to increase the chances of students using the language learning opportunities. Interestingly, many of the task engagement principles overlap with language learning principles. Let's look at some salient principles of task engagement. Classroom tasks should be authentic, that is, students should perceive them as being connected to their lives. Deciding on what is considered authentic requires educators to survey students' backgrounds and interests. Observing authenticity is also key in culturally relevant pedagogy. Tasks should be interesting, that is, in addition to being meaningful, they need to absorb a student's attention in the presence of other forms of attraction in class. Tasks need to provide students with opportunities to engage in social interaction. In other words, a social interaction component should be included in a task. You remember that social interaction was one of the principles of language learning as well. Tasks should be optimally challenging for students. That is, There needs to be a balance of a skill and challenge for students so that they are neither bored because the task is very easy nor frustrated because it is very difficult. Tasks should provide the students with a sense of agency in choosing task aspects. In other words, a task should provide students with a sense of autonomy so that they can feel that they are in control of the learning process. Similarly, there should be a reasonable degree of structure in a task so that students know how to proceed and how they are assessed. Tasks should provide students with a range of resources to receive feedback and scaffolds. This component is also directly related to the balance of a skill and challenge, and you remember that feedback and scaffolds were also among language learning principles. Now that you know about these principles, you can probably tell why you might have been disengaged in a previous learning experience, or maybe just this one. These principles can be applied to the teaching of any content, and not just language learning, to make the learning process more engaging for students. So, in our approach to call, task engagement principles need to be supported when using technology. Additional support in planning, implementing, and assessing call comes from TESOL technology standards for language teachers and learners. TESOL stands for Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages and is known as the largest professional organization for teachers of English as a second or foreign language. TESOL technology standards present concise, evidence-based goals, related standards, performance indicators, and contextualized examples for teachers to consider what they and their students need to be able to do with and through language and technology. It is interesting to learn that the principles of language learning and task engagement have been considered in the process of designing the standards. The standards also address 21st century skills such as problem solving, creativity, and critical thinking. Finally, some guidelines on technology use are worth mentioning. Use technology to support the pedagogical goals of the class and curriculum. In other words, teachers should not use the computer simply for its own sake. Make sure the technology is accessible to all learners. In other words, technology should be used to address as many of the learner's needs as possible and be useful for a variety of instructional purposes. Use the technology as a tool. The most useful way to look at technology is as a tool that supports learning in a wide variety of ways and not as a teacher. Use technology effectively. Effective here means that students learn language better or faster using the technology than they would have using the tools that would ordinarily be available. Use technology efficiently. Efficient indicates that technology accomplishes learning goals with less time and work for teachers and learners. To recap, in this text, the basis for using technology to support language learning comprises four central components. 1. Language learning principles which overlap with 2. Task engagement principles which are included in 3. TESOL technology standards which address 4. Guidelines for technology use in educational settings.